we expect users to cognitively manage multiple balances. So they need to like think, okay, well, now I have 10 USDT on chain B, but I still have 5 USDT on chain A. So now I want to use chain C, but I want to use 15 USDC on chain C. So I need a bridge from chain B and chain A. And then now I have some dust left in these wallets. So like, but I need gas. So what we're doing at Particle is we're building for chain abstraction at the account level. You have these Bitcoin layer 2s that are emerging as like an extension of Bitcoin, right? So they're meant to kind of like capture a lot of the value from the Bitcoin ecosystem and have users leverage EVM compatible kind of functionality and in a more scalable environment on these Bitcoin layer 2s.
Welcome back to DeFi Revelations. My name's Kirk. I'm the head of business development with Revelo Intel. Today, we are joined by Ethan from Particle Network for an excellent discussion around chain abstraction and the new frontier of DeFi. We hope you enjoyed the episode. Welcome, everybody, back to another episode of DeFi Revelations. We've got another excellent discussion for you today. We've got Ethan, who's the head of DevRel at Particle Network. Welcome to the show, sir.
Hello. Thanks for having me. I'm excited for this.
Yeah, absolutely. So to set the stage, chain abstraction is quickly becoming, I think, one of the new metas, with recent developments from several teams like Socket, Everclear, yourselves. So I'm really excited to discuss what you guys are building and how, you guys view this, because I think it's a paradigm shifting technology or I guess movement, that's kind of picking up steam. So really, really excited to dive into it. So thanks again, Ethan. To start the show, always like to go into your personal background, like tell us a little bit about yourself, how you got into crypto, and then we'll take things from there.
Sure. Yeah, happy to. And yeah, I think just to quickly touch on what you mentioned regarding chain abstraction, share the same sentiment. We've been talking a lot about it for the past few months, and I think it's, as we'll get into in a little bit, I think one of the most important problems that need to be solved in Web3, and I think chain abstraction is addressing it, and it's actually a relatively small vertical still. So it's very interesting, the solutions that are being built, and we'll get into it a little bit later. But yeah, I think it's awesome. I know that you guys have done a podcast with Everclear and whatnot, and there's some amazing builders in this vertical. So yeah, pumped to get into it. But to start with a little bit of an intro for myself, my name is, or my alias is Tabasco. My real name is Ethan. And I've been building this space now for, I guess, 4.5 years or so. I started kind of building some of my own things back when I was around 15 in the space, and then built a few projects of my own. They grew to a decent size. I had this one application that I built, got a few thousand users. It was big in the Harmony community. Harmony, one old blockchain, it got hacked a while ago, and it's not doing too great today, but there used to be a huge community around it. So I was pretty big into it back then, and built some stuff that got pretty popular. And then I joined, we called Chainstack when I was roughly 16. That was kind of my first gig in Web3. I did developer relations over there for quite a while, for about 1.5 years, and then joined Particle back in September of last year. Been here for about a year at this point. And I do developer relations over here. So I handle all of our kind of, a lot of our external communications, a lot of our marketing, as well as all of our developer content, documentation, developer engagement, that kind of stuff. So it's a lot of fun. It's definitely, quite different from kind of traditional stuff, but I think that we've been making a lot of progress at Particle, and we have a lot of really cool stuff that we're kind of cooking up over the next few months, and it's pretty exciting. So it's been a lot of fun to kind of be at the forefront of what I really believe to be like one of the most like truly impactful verticals in the space right now. I mean, you have a lot of really cool innovations that are happening in Web3, which is like, deep in like the ZK space, all these like really cool infrastructural innovations. But I think that like, when you get down to it, ultimately the adoption of Web3, it comes down to user experience friction. And this is kind of always what we've been focused on. So the main reason why I actually moved from the company that I was at previously, which was an RPC provider, providing infrastructure for developers. The reason I moved was because I wanted to focus more on UX, and because I really do believe that like UX is one of the final frontiers for really getting Web3 to a position where it's ready for consumer onboarding. So this is exactly kind of what we've been focused on for the past, 2+ years at Particle. And since I joined, we've really been kind of evolving the product stack to a point now where chain abstraction is kind of the core thing that we're pushing for. And so it's been really exciting. And I think it's been, it's been really cool to see like how that whole vertical has evolved. And of course, how we've kind of, been pushing towards on the product side. which we'll get into. But yeah, a little bit about my background and how I joined Particle and stuff like that.
Awesome. Yeah, we appreciate it. So, and again, I think you touched on it. We touched on it in the intro too. Chain abstraction, right? So, I think Particle identifies itself as a modular L1. That's focused on chain abstraction. So maybe let's get into Particle. A little bit. Give us the maybe the elevator pitch, or get into the basics of Particle. What is the project, and what are your goals? How are you guys going to accomplish this massive goal of chain abstraction?
Yeah, so I guess for a little bit of context, maybe it'd be helpful if I first kind of define chain abstraction. I think this is, something that most people might think that they kind of initially understand. But I think one issue with chain abstraction at the moment within this vertical is that there's not a huge amount of social consensus around like what exactly is chain abstraction, what does it refer to? Like I think if you ask a room of 100 people that are like kind of related to the space, like what is chain abstraction, you're going to get 100 different answers probably. We've tried to fix this a little bit. We've written some articles that have like kind of proposed more formal definitions of the term, but like in general, what you can understand chain abstraction is as sort of like chain abstraction ultimately is an experience. And it's not so chain abstraction isn't like one technology or a few technologies. It's defined as an experience, and specifically an experience that is exempt from like the manual processes that you'd typically be required to do to interact with multiple chains. So this includes things like, bridging or managing balances across multiple chains, or managing maybe different wallets and things like this. So chain abstraction really kind of looks at the current landscape and says, well, users are required to do a lot. Like we ask a lot for end users, where if I want to use application A on chain A, and I onboard with my, MetaMask wallet or even my Google account or my Twitter account or whatever I want to onboard with, social logins, that kind of stuff. It's great. I'm in that application, I'm using it, and I deposit funds into that application on that chain. And then I move to another chain for application B on chain B, for example. And as soon as I move over there, I'm on a completely different balance. Sometimes I need to use a different wallet, different mechanism of onboarding. I need to, if I want to get my funds from that original application over to this new application, then I have to find a bridge. There are some great bridges today. Like, I won't lie and say like bridging is a broken thing. I think actually bridging is really good today, but it's just the fact that you just have to do that manually is kind of a problem. And then further than that, we expect users to cognitively manage multiple balances. So they need to like think, okay, well now I have 10 USDT on chain B, but I still have 5 USDT on chain A. So now I want to use chain C, but I want to use 15 USDC on chain C. So I need a bridge from chain B and chain A. And then now I have some dust left in these wallets. So but I need gas to do that. So now I need to like on ramp or swap. I mean, just like this whole idea of like, managing multiple gas tokens, managing balances across chains, and needing a bridge across chains. These are pretty massive complexities that we expect for end users to just get. And it's clear that a lot of them, they don't get it because it's a massive point of friction that most people avoid, and really the only users that want to go through this type of process are usually incentivized to do so. So they want to do so. They want to bridge to another chain for some sort of airdrop or whatever it may be, which makes sense that they would then put themselves through that kind of process. But normal consumers and end users, they really want to avoid this. So this is where this whole idea of chain abstraction comes in, which is simply the removal of all that friction I just mentioned into an experience where as a user, you can basically leverage applications across any chain without really knowing what chain the application is built on. Or without needing to know this. So I can, let's say, deposit 10 USDC on Arbitrum and Ethereum, and I can use that on any chain. I can use it. That's 20 USDC that I have. So the chains where I have all these like balances and whatnot, they actually become irrelevant. I just have my balance. So if I have 5 USDC split across 5 chains, then I have 25 USDC. I mean, there's no like differentiation there between like, oh, okay, I need a bridge, I need to manage different balances. You just have one balance across every chain. The applications that you use can be built on any chain, and you don't necessarily need to be aware of this as an end user. So you can almost think of this as like, chains become sort of like almost like a cloud provider. The way that like as a user, I don't know if like, the StreamYard, which is what we're using right now, I don't know if they're using GCP or AWS or whatever. I don't care. I mean, they use whatever they want to use. Same thing with like applications in Web3. It's going to transition to this idea where applications just use whatever chain works best for them, not the chain with the most users. So a lot of the time applications say, okay, I want to go to this ecosystem because there's a lot of liquidity, there's a lot of users. But this whole dynamic becomes irrelevant with chain abstraction because simply the experience just becomes a relationship between purely the user and the application. And the chain is removed from this relationship. The user is unaware of it. The developer only chooses it based on their technical needs. And it's all done in the background. So this is really the essence of chain abstraction, is the removal of these manual multi-chain processes from the user experience. So what we're doing at Particle is we're building for chain abstraction at the account level. So chain abstraction is really a multi-discipline, it's like a multi-layered approach to achieving this experience. Because chain abstraction is quite an ambitious thing. It sounds simple of okay, you just remove chains from the user experience. But it's actually doing this is difficult because chains are very fundamentally ingrained in Web3 and the experience. So it's how do you abstract this away without sacrificing decentralization or security or whatever it may be? Centralized exchanges do a great job of chain abstraction, but they're centralized. So I don't care what chain, it's not even a thing with Binance or whatever it may be, which is why people love centralized exchanges typically. But so how do you do this in a way that's decentralized and secure and trustless and stuff like this? This is really what chain abstraction attempts to solve. But to solve this, there's multiple layers to it. So there's multiple different types of products building different solutions that are targeting different audiences and different ways to really achieve a complete experience that kind of falls within those lines. So at Particle, we do this at the account level. So we build what you can call our marketing term for it is universal accounts. And universal accounts essentially are an account type. It's based on smart contract wallets, account abstraction, that lets users simply have one account and one balance that is applicable to every chain, to the entire ecosystem. So we really provide the more user-facing side of chain abstraction, which is that users can onboard to applications using their MetaMask or their social login or whatever. They have their universal account, and they can use this anywhere with the same balance. So they lose all the differentiation between chains. They simply just have one balance for the entire ecosystem. So this is what we're building. And part of our tagline is, our tagline is the L1 unifying all chains through universal accounts. So the way that we actually achieve this is through a Cosmos SDK-based blockchain that is used for coordination. So like I mentioned earlier, one of the challenges for chain abstraction is doing this in a way that's decentralized and permissionless and open. So we solve this through the means of a blockchain that is used for coordination and sort of decentralized ways of kind of coordinating transactions across chains and doing so in a way that is efficient and secure and stuff like this. So we can maybe get more into the details, but at a high level, that's what chain abstraction is, and that's kind of how we're building towards it at the account level.
Pair Protocol is the first and only trading platform for narrative trading. Their technology unlocks the ability for anyone to pair trade. For example, if you think ETH will outperform Cardano, you can long ETH ADA in one click with leverage. Or perhaps you think Pepe will continue to outperform Doge. You can long Pepe Doge. Again, all in one transaction. The combinations are endless. Learn more at beta.pair.garden. Yeah. And obviously a very important problem that you guys are looking to solve, right? And I think you mentioned it, right? And I couldn't agree more. The UX is the most important thing, I think, to focus on, if we all want to move forward as an industry. So it's awesome that, we've got, builders such as yourself and Particle Network, thinking about these things very, very holistically. So I guess to get into the weeds a little bit more though, right? So you mentioned the universal accounts. You guys also have, universal liquidity, universal gas. Maybe dive into each of those a little bit more and tell us exactly what it is. And maybe, especially I think on the gas side, it has my interest. How do you guys achieve this, right? Where you have universal gas on all these different chains, what's happening under the hood there. But yeah, feel free to start wherever you want there, and let's dive into each of those three.
Sure. Yeah, it's a good question because we kind of see specifically the reason why I specify that we're kind of doing chain abstraction for accounts specifically is because, to be clear, we also see that chain abstraction is quite important to be achieved at the application level as well as even the blockchain level. So you have ag layer, and then you have things like socket and whatnot for the application level. So for us at specifically the account level, we identified three main issues that users typically face. And there's more issues like this, but that's when you start getting out of account level and into application level and stuff like that. So specifically when you're looking at accounts, you can kind of identify the three things, which is number one, a standardization of interaction point. So in the address that you use across the ecosystem and the means that you use to interact with the ecosystem. So one challenge is that if I have, for example, if I want to interact with Solana, Bitcoin, and Ethereum, I'm using three different wallets and I'm using three different addresses. And I'm using three different points of interaction. So part of chain abstraction is saying, well, you should be able to use whatever wallet you want across these chains. If I want to use MetaMask across Bitcoin, Solana, and Ethereum, then I should be able to do that. If I want to use Phantom or whatever, Unisat across these chains, I should be able to do that as well, whatever I'm comfortable with as a user. And so universal accounts basically allow you to have one account that spans every chain. So you can have simply one wallet, one account that is universalized across every chain. And the way that we do this is that, like, for example, in the case of like EVM and non-EVM, we kind of can take a almost near-like approach, which is where we can have accounts that are owned by like a master EVM address, and then they're kind of like computationally equivalent to the EVM address. So we do this. We actually have, I think we're going to talk about it later, but we have a product called BTC Connect where we already do this, where essentially we can take an address on EVM and sort of like make it equivalent to an address on Bitcoin, to where like they can be signed by the same mechanism, and there's all these kind of cool things with signature aggregation and stuff like that. But the idea with universal accounts is basically you can have the same point of interaction. You can use the same wallet across any chain, EVM or non-EVM. And so you don't need to really worry about like managing 10 different wallets or like, what addresses you're using or whatever it may be. You have your interaction point for the ecosystem and you can leave it at that. So that's one problem, was kind of the fragmentation of access points. The second problem is the fragmentation of liquidity. Fragmentation of liquidity is quite a big problem as well, because, for example, it kind of goes back to the main thing that I mentioned earlier, which is if I have a balance right now on chain A, chain B, and chain C, then I need to manage all that myself. I need to bridge across chains. They're fundamentally fragmented. So, like universal liquidity basically looks at that and says, well, how do we resolve that? Well, you can do so through automatically basically routing funds across chains in order to meet user goals. So what I mean by this is that if I want to do a transaction on chain F that's worth 100 USDC, and if I have 50 USDC on Ethereum and 50 USDC on Arbitrum, then universal liquidity says, okay, well, the user has 100 USDC. They just don't have it on chain F, but we know that they have it on chain A and chain B. So what we can do is combine those two and then use that to pay for the transaction. And I won't get too deep into technical details. It gets pretty complicated in terms of like how we achieve this, maybe a little bit later. But the essence of universal liquidity is basically saying balances need to be equivalent across chains. I should be able to use my funds across any chain without really needing to be aware of what chains they are spanned across, to where I just basically have, here's my total balance on these different tokens. Let me use it wherever I want to. So this really takes a look at the value the user has in their account, the tokens that the user has in their account, and lets them use it anywhere. And then, so that's the second problem. So number one, fragmentation of access points. Number two, fragmentation of your balances, really. Number three is the requirement to manage multiple gas tokens. This is another problem that kind of sucks on a multi-chain level. It's like, I need to hold Sol, I need to hold ETH, I need to hold BNB and whatever it may be to pay for gas in these different chains. So how do you solve that? It's what we call universal gas, is basically saying you should be able to pay for gas with any token from any chain. So if I want to pay for gas on Base using Bonk on Solana, then I should be able to do that. I don't know. It's like whatever the user wants, they should have access to be able to do this. Like, it shouldn't be a blocker necessarily. So universal gas looks at that problem and says, users shouldn't really have to have 20 tokens on each chain to pay for gas. This is kind of a ridiculous thing that we also still today ask for users. So if they have UCC on a totally different chain, they should be able to use that to pay for their gas on another chain. Or if they want to use some other token to pay for gas on another chain, then they can do that. It's up to the user at this point. So we're giving the choice back to the user, where they don't need to have a specific token on a specific chain to pay for gas anymore. It's universalized, where they can use anything. So this comes down to those three problems that I mentioned: access point, balances, and gas. That's where you have universal accounts to solve the access point problem, to have the same account, the same address across all chains. You have the universal liquidity kind of functionality to solve the balance fragmentation issue, to have the same balance across all chains. Then you have universal gas to solve kind of the multi-chain gas issue, to where you can use any token for gas across all chains. So this is, at the account level, really the important components of what creates what we consider to be a chain abstraction experience. Because if you can solve all these problems, and all of a sudden now as a user, I can go interact with any application on any chain, pay for transactions using my balance from any other chain, pay for gas using any token from any chain, have the same account across all these chains. So at this point, where is the chain? What is the chain in relation to the user? It's irrelevant, right? So they no longer need to really be aware of what chain that they're using, because their balances are universalized. They don't need to worry about gas tokens. They don't need to worry about what wallets they're using. They just use the application. So this is really the experience that we're trying to nail down. And of course, it gets more complicated than this once you start to think about, well, how do developers integrate this, and how do you create a more native chain abstraction experience on the application level, and how do you do this in a way that's fast and stuff like this. So it's quite an interesting problem, but this is at least how we approach it with those kind of three core functionalities.
Gotcha. Yeah. Can I just say real quick that This excites me so much. Like, I don't know if anybody listening or if you've ever dealt with this, Ethan, but of course you're always stuck on a random chain. You want to get your I don't know. I want to get my $20 of USDC off of this chain, but all I have in my all the other things I have in my wallet are shit coins, and now I need to, like, I wish I could just use these shit coins, right, to pay for gas and get it out of here. So it sounds like that's an unlock that's going to be possible, which is fantastic. I'm sure everybody has dealt with that before, but I deal with it all the time. I'm just like, oh man, like I don't have anything of value except for shit coins in my wallet that I can use as gas, which is awesome. So from a user experience, it's awesome. My follow up question to this though is, and maybe you can spend a little bit of time explaining this to me, but if that's possible as a user, that means that like some kind of smart contracts or the protocol in some way is obviously facilitating these swaps into the native gas of that destination chain or whatever chain you want to call it. So how does that work? Like if I don't know, if I have Bonk, but I want to pay Bonk as gas on Ethereum. Like, walk me through that a little bit. Like, how does that work? Because it seems to me like it's still very expensive to transact on some of these chains, right? It's still very clunky from that level. So how do you guys actually accomplish that?
Yeah, so this is a big part of kind of where our more extended infrastructure comes in. So of course, like I mentioned earlier, we have this layer one blockchain or like Cosmos SDK based blockchain that's used for coordination. And this is like actually on chain is where our paymaster is held. And our paymaster basically says, if I want to, for example, use Bonk on Solana or USDT on Base to pay for a transaction on Arbitrum, what we simply do is we can first transfer these tokens we have like paymasters, like typical ERC-437 paymasters on different chains as well. So we can transfer these tokens to those paymasters, and then the paymaster basically just covers the gas fees temporarily, and then it receives the payment, whatever token that it wants, and then it'll automatically swap back to that token. And then ultimately the transaction, so our chain, for some context, basically acts as sort of like a point of verification and coordination. So like going back to the user experience, if I want to send a transaction, let's say I want to buy an NFT on Base using USDT on Arbitrum, and I want to also use that same USDT to pay for the gas. So in this flow, as a user, I click confirm on the transaction, and it takes around 7 seconds, let's say. In those 7 seconds, essentially what happens is that our chain first says, okay, well, we have the sequence of transactions that was calculated or computed at the SDK level. So the SDK first says, okay, well, we want to move these funds across chains. So let's quickly compute what transactions need to happen to make that possible. So then we figure that out, and then we kind of forward this over to our chain, and our chain says, here's 6 transactions that we need to execute to make this possible. First, this needs to be verified, so we can actually have some degree of security assurance through the means of the chain. And then the chain, from that point, once these transactions are actually verified, can then facilitate the execution of these transactions on each chain. We use something called bundler nodes to make this possible. So we then have these nodes, these bundlers kind of facilitate execution. So we do execution of transaction 1, 2, 3 in a way that's sequential, but it's atomic. So we use what we call bundled user operations, which is a attribute that you have with ERC-437, where we can basically send multiple transactions in a given ledger entry and a given user operation, essentially is what it's the technical term for it. So once we can do this settled on chain, we continue through the sequence of transactions, and then we have other nodes on our network that basically looks for the status of these transactions and says, has it been successful, et cetera, et cetera. And once we can track the execution status of these transactions, we can see that everything has been successful. We can actually ultimately settle the sequence of transactions on our chain as its own kind of ledger entry in our chain. That's settled in our native token. So our native token settles every transaction sequence that happens through the means of universal accounts, and that's settled on our chain after it's verified and relayed by bundler nodes. A little bit complicated here, but basically what can also happen is that our paymaster will take payment in any token, and then, of course, through the means of our more off-chain paymasters, we can sponsor the transaction. Then we pay ourselves back with the whatever funds we wanted to use for gas, and then we ultimately still settle the transaction with the gas fee being our token on our chain. So the transaction is still settled using our token, but the user has no awareness of our token. They don't need to hold our token. They don't need to hold the token of the native network, of course, because it's a very simple mechanism of purely us covering the transaction cost and paying ourselves back using that token, and then ultimately settling in our native token on our chain through the means of this paymaster. So kind of interesting architecture. You can see there's a few other projects that take a similar approach, sort of having this coordination chain that's a decentralized sort of like, layer that's basically just purely meant for decentralization and security assurance. Whenever I have a sequence of transactions verified, executed, then settled, this is essentially how it works in the background. And we can tie this all together with the paymaster, which just, like I mentioned, sponsors and then pays itself back. So that's kind of how the actual universal liquidity and universal gas mechanism works on the back end.
Vertex is a lightning-fast order book DEX offering spot, perpetuals, and money markets with unified cross-margin and a vertically integrated product suite. With Vertex Edge, users can tap into the power of shared cross-chain order book liquidity across Arbitrum, Blast, and Mantle, while earning trading rewards in VRTX, ARB, and MNT. Traders can access over 50 spot and perpetual markets alongside the GMCI 30 and meme indices, with low-fee trading and capital efficiency, all while preserving self-custody and on-chain settlement. Learn more at vertexprotocol.com. Awesome. No, that makes sense, actually. Weirdly enough, even though I'm not technical, that made perfect sense to me. You mentioned BTC Connect earlier. I wanted to spend a little bit of time diving into that because, obviously there's a lot of development going on for, pushing Bitcoin L2s forward. Obviously, massive amounts of liquidity that are largely untapped in DeFi through Bitcoin. Let's talk about that a little bit. Talk about BTC Connect, and ultimately, I think there's a plan to fuse those into universal accounts as well, from what I understand. So let's touch on that a little bit.
Yeah. So for a little bit of context, our product evolution at Particle, we've always been very UX focused. So we've always had products that are centered around user experience and trying to solve issues for that. So we started off with what we call wallet as a service. It's just social logins, essentially embedded wallets. You've probably used something like that before with other applications that are more consumer facing. So this is our first major product in the space was simply logging into applications with your Google account, your Twitter account, stuff like that, and being able to use it through not having to download any wallets. You don't need to maintain MetaMask or seed phrases or anything like that. Just use your social account to log in. We started with this, kind of our first major product. Then we evolved that product into what you can call Smart Wallet as a Service, which ties the same process in with account abstraction. So you can log in via your Google account, your Twitter account, into a smart contract wallet, which you can then do for things like gasless transactions and pop-up list transactions and all that kind of stuff. So that's one product that we actually have separately, and we still do this today. Then extending from this whole focus on account abstraction that we had mostly last year was BTC Connect. BTC Connect is essentially an answer to the growing trend of Bitcoin layer 2s in the ecosystem, but we identified a pretty large UX issue with this growing trend, which is that you have these Bitcoin layer 2s that are emerging as an extension of Bitcoin, right? So they're meant to kind of capture a lot of the value from the Bitcoin ecosystem and have users leverage EVM compatible kind of functionality and in a more scalable environment on these Bitcoin layer 2s. But this comes off with a big trade-off, which is that if I'm a Bitcoin native user, I'm leveraging wallets like Unisat or Xverse or OKX or whatever else it may be. So then now I want to go use a Bitcoin layer 2 and I want to use DeFi on Bitcoin through the means of a Bitcoin layer 2. And I've downloaded a totally different wallet because this is EVM compatible. So there's no way I can use Unisat. I have to go download MetaMask and learn MetaMask, and I have to download whatever else I want to use, right? So this is a problem because it means that the actual tooling ecosystem between Bitcoin layer 2s and Bitcoin itself is completely separate and isolated from each other. There is no overlap there. MetaMask cannot be used for Bitcoin, and Unisat, Xverse, etc. cannot be used for EVM compatible Bitcoin layer 2s. This is a pretty huge problem because this means that you can't onboard native Bitcoin users to Bitcoin layer 2s very easily, and vice versa. So there's a huge barrier here between the two. So BTC Connect essentially addresses that, and through the means of account abstraction, very simply, you can just use your Unisat wallet, your Xverse wallet, to use a Bitcoin layer 2 that's EVM compatible. So we basically take these wallets and we can take a Bitcoin account and essentially convert it to an EVM account and use the Bitcoin address to, or use the Bitcoin account to basically sign transactions for an EVM compatible smart contract wallet. So I just connect my Unisat, I can fund the smart contract wallet, I sign transactions with my Unisat or with my Xverse wallet or whatever else I want to use. And I can just simply use it as if I was using MetaMask or something like that. I sign transactions with it. I maintain my balance through the means of an equivalent account. So it's very simple. It's basically just not a very complicated product. It's just solving that kind of point of friction, that lack of parity, allowing you to use your Bitcoin native wallets on EVM compatible Bitcoin layer 2s. But of course, this has large implications because this is going to be a big part of the core functionality that we have in the future of being able to use the same address across all ecosystems, because we're going to use a very similar address conversion mechanism and signature aggregation mechanism to allow for that within universal accounts. And importantly, like you mentioned, in the future, what's going to happen is we are no longer really going to have distinct products necessarily, or like, I guess there's not going to be as much of a distinction between BTC Connect and Smart Walls of Service and universal accounts. Our goal is for everything to be universal account. So if I onboard users via their Unisat wallet or Xverse wallet, they're using their universal account tied to that. If I onboard users via their social login with Walls of Service, that's the universal account that they onboard into. So everything in our stack becomes a universal account. If you're already using BTC Connect or Smart Walls of Service, that gets upgraded to a universal account. Because universal accounts are primarily just a mixture of SDK level integrations and coordination through our chain. So we don't actually need to make a lot of contract or really any contract level changes to accounts. Very simply, we can actually upgrade everybody that's already using smart accounts through BTC Connect or through Smart Walls of Service into universal accounts. So this means that universal accounts are basically immediately going to be onboarded and used by every application that leverages either of those products. And as a user, as soon as it releases, you're going to immediately have access to this. So if you already have your funds fragmented across chains, if you're already using any of these products, like in a few months, you're going to be able to take advantage of this full chain abstraction idea through the means of universal accounts without having to do anything. Don't need to manually upgrade. It all happens automatically. And every account made through these products in the future will be universal. This is kind of the idea that we're getting into. These products are more granular implementations of social logins, BTC wallets, that kind of stuff. But in the future, it'll all be unified under this kind of universal account kind of idea product. And this is our current goal for kind of the evolution of these products as well.
Yeah, that's interesting. So I guess, on the compatibility, I guess, topic, right? Are you guys seeing, I guess your main target audience being the L1s and L2s themselves, or are you guys focused on actually like onboarding applications, onto Particle Network and compatible there?
It's a little bit of both. We are very close partners with a lot of kind of like, L1s, L2s, app chains, stuff like that. But in the future, it'll be very easy to extend support to these guys. It's not like our main audience. Our main audience is applications. So we're going to have an SDK that essentially allows you to use universal accounts in a given application. So our big goal is going to be getting developers to adopt it. We already have around 900 to 1,000 applications that use our social logins and our BTC Connect kind of products at the moment. So there's already going to be a pretty big ecosystem of supported applications that use universal accounts. And once we do release it, our big thing is going to be basically just expanding the ecosystem at the application level. So we affect the account level when it comes to the experience, but our main kind of target audience is developers to integrate our SDK and therefore allow users to connect with universal accounts. So this is kind of how we look at it. And we have a lot of initiatives that are going to be kind of geared towards that. We have a lot of developer content already today around our other products. So we're going to be pushing pretty hard on this going into the next few months, because ideally we have an ecosystem of thousands of applications that support this so that as a user, I can use it anywhere essentially. And I don't need to worry about compatibility or anything like that. So that's our main goal at the moment, or it will be our main goal once we launch mainnet, which will be integration across applications within the ecosystem.
It's a huge unlock, because if I'm an application, and I want to expose myself to, the largest distribution possible, tapping into something like universal accounts is like, it's a no-brainer, right? But I think it's something that it's kind of been a problem for applications thus far, right? Is like choosing like, okay, like it's a trade-off, right? If I'm going to go build on Arbitrum, the trade-off is, okay, maybe like users on Optimism, might not be able to tap in, or obviously, Bitcoin L2s or, so on and so forth. So I think it's a huge unlock, for applications and kind of, uniting the ecosystem. So, definitely awesome to hear you guys really kind of innovating in this space. It's going to be great. I wanted to ask you a little bit more, about, the way that you guys go about, building the community, I guess, right? So I think we've seen, Barachain and Monad are two really, really good examples of, they've built very, very vibrant communities, pre-token, right? And obviously like pre-mainnet, and you guys are in a similar situation. How do you guys think about those things? Strategies, any insights on, how you guys view, building out the developer community, but then also like the, ultimately, the retail community and the application community as well.
Yeah. I think first, before I get too far into that, I want to highlight a point that you just mentioned, which I thought was quite strong and important to talk about briefly, which is that applications today are confined to the ecosystem that they deploy on. So if I deploy an application on Arbitrum, then I'm getting Arbitrum users and not necessarily as many Optimism users, or if I'm, vice versa. Like this is a pretty big problem that I think a lot of people don't talk about as much. And even us, like we focus a lot, like in our conversation and in our articulation of chain abstraction, we focus on the user side of it, like the user effects. But for developers as well, this is a huge thing because it means that developers today are limiting themselves to either one ecosystem or a small set of ecosystems. And it's really hard to get more users from outside those ecosystems because there's friction associated with that. So what's going to happen, and this is going to be very interesting to see, is that all of a sudden, as we shift towards like a chain abstracted future, applications are going to be able to build anywhere and not need to worry about where their users are coming from, because users turn into this sort of like universal resource where users are chain agnostic at this point. So I can get, if I deploy at any chain that I want to, I'll get users from around the ecosystem because users are no longer mindful of specific chains. So the entire ecosystem, the entire market of Web3 becomes far more competitive and free market-like, because currently competition is at mostly an ecosystem level because of this friction. So if I'm a DEX on Linea, my competition isn't really a DEX on BNB. My competition is a DEX on Linea, right? So I'm only competing with other apps on Linea. So all of a sudden, if we remove all of the barriers and the confines that are attached to specific chains, then competition becomes way more like fierce on an ecosystem level, where now I'm not competing with only DEX on Linea. I'm competing with every application across the ecosystem that's doing something similar to me. And so I need to up my game. I need to focus on user experience. I need to really try to, push myself forward, because there's no longer like this like kind of, I think a lot of applications, they get into this like mode today in Web3 where they just coast because they have a good amount of market share within a given ecosystem. They have enough users. Nobody's really competing with them because it's a small ecosystem. So they just do whatever and they make enough money. But all of a sudden, if there's no barriers between chains, and if you need to compete with the entire Web3 industry to really get users, the whole incentive structure for developers changes, where now they need to really focus on user experience. They need to focus on security. They need to focus on use cases that people want to leverage. And they need to do this because users are still a finite resource, but they become even more competitive because at this point, like there's no ecosystem siloing of users. They're universalized. So this is a really important point that I think beyond just like, oh, the user experience is going to be better, I can pay for gas with any token, all this kind of interesting things, really at an ecosystem level, at an industry level, I believe personally that this is going to change the entire dynamic of why builders build applications, the applications that they choose to build, and kind of their priorities in building applications. So I think it's going to be very interesting. And I think what we're going to see hopefully is a push towards more innovative products that focus on user experience. And hopefully as a result, at least the way that I see it personally, is like chain abstraction is one of the first major dominoes that kind of start this effect of eventually reaching really good product market fit, consumer facing applications that are ready for like the mass market, that feel like Web 2. And I think this is ultimately the goal, is how do you abstract away everything to the point where we're basically like, I think at the end of the day, we want applications that take advantage of like the unique properties of Web 3, but have the user experience of Web 2 to where it feels like as a user, I don't even know that I'm using Web3. I think this is the goal. I think chain abstraction is one of the first really huge components that will start a trend towards achieving this, not only in terms of user experience, but also in terms of incentives and how the ecosystem competes with one another. So a little bit of a long-winded kind of note on that, but I think it's a very important component that is usually underexplored. When it comes to how we build community and how we kind of gain retail users and whatnot, I think it's also a good point. Because, as an infrastructure project, sometimes it's difficult to really understand, like, who is our community? Like, is it developers? Is it users? Is it both? We tend to be more developer facing, especially like once we launch mainnet, we'll kind of focus on that. The way that we do this is through a lot of, we do a ton of developer content. So we produce a lot of videos, a lot of documentation, a lot of tutorials. Like if you go into the documentation of pretty much any major blockchain today, I would say 7 out of 10 of them probably have some sort of page about Particle and about using our stack. Like we've done a lot of work in terms of like every documentation, every chain having something there, every educational platform in Web3 that's meant for developers or something about Particle there. So we've been really focused on trying to have as much information available as possible. And as such, we've built a pretty good developer community. We have a pretty large number of developers. We track around 40,000 active users of our developer dashboard and stuff like this. So it's pretty good. And overall, we're quite happy with our traction in the developer community. Of course, we're increasing this as we approach mainnet. We want to hone in on this so that we have even more ideally, and we have pretty large scale ecosystem consensus around integration of our SDKs. But we do a lot on the content side to really facilitate this, which is developers typically most appreciate high quality content, high quality documentation, demos, stuff like this. So we just do this in very high volumes at high quality. For users, it's more of an interesting dynamic because as an infrastructure project, how do you really attract retail users, and why do you want to attract retail users? I think awareness is a good point, and getting people familiar with this technology has really been our main goal. So how do you get people on board with this idea of no longer needing to worry about chains, especially those that are already in Web3? Surprisingly, this is actually a hard transition to make mentally, and we found this. So actually, just today, we released a product, not a product necessarily, but we released the second phase of our testnet. And this introduced the full universal balance, universal liquidity functionality that I mentioned earlier, and universal gas. So it's actually already live in testnet. You can try it today. And we have a full incentivized testnet campaign around it. And we released it earlier today, and we found that users have at least initially, it's kind of hard to switch your mindset from wait, I just want to I need to use a certain chain. I need to connect to a certain chain to use my balances there. But we've been basically telling people forget about that. You don't need to think about this anymore. Just forget about the whole notion of change. Just you have your balance here, just use it. And so we've been seeing this really interesting change, and people have been kind of getting it. They're like, oh wait, I get this. I don't need to think about my chain. I don't need to think about where my balances are. I just use my balance. And people have been really receptive to this so far. So I think it's a very interesting change. And we've been running a lot of campaigns recently around building awareness around this technology and showing people what this really means for them as a user. I was seeing a lot of really good reception around this. And we've been building sort of a community of people that aren't developers, but are still really interested in this idea, that have been very excited about the implementation of this on an ecosystem scale. So we historically, I've been very proactive in running a lot of campaigns of this nature that are user facing, so incentivize things. And we have a bunch of kind of sub products, almost sub organizations within the Particle Network umbrella that are more user facing, that kind of incorporate a lot of our products, BTC Connect, social logins, et cetera, the kind of traction to create these really interesting kind of interactive experiences for users that are sort of full campaigns that they can try and engage with our products and whatnot. Which is great for us because it means that we get feedback, and it means people get familiar with these kind of ideas. And so far, especially with the chain abstraction, we've seen a lot of really good feedback, and people are really latching onto the idea of I can forget about what chain my balances are on, and people really like this. So I think we've found a lot of value in building a community around the value of the technology itself, and people just wanting to be a part of the community because they find the technology interesting, and of course they want to participate in the campaigns. So this has been our main kind of goal, has been our main method of really achieving a more retail focused community in these two areas. Has been number one, running campaigns, facing and kind of trying to onboard these users, and also doing so in a way that highlights the technology and gives people an opportunity to use what is a relatively novel technology in the Web3 space. So these are kind of the approaches that we take to community building as well.
Yeah. Honestly, I think I've been trying to think about this. I'm how is Monad doing such a good job? How is Beratain doing such a good job? And obviously I think you guys have it as well, but I really do think that as an infrastructure play, an infrastructure company, it's got to be on the developer side, and then, I guess as my primary focus, and then retail next, because if you can get the builders excited about building on your L1 or L2, they're going to get their users excited, right? And they're going to bring the users with them, no matter what. I think users follow applications. So I think it's definitely the right approach, and it sounds like you guys have your head on straight when it comes to that. So it's great to see, man. It's awesome. I'm really excited to try out, what you guys have built at Particle. So I think it's a good time to maybe wrap up. But before we do, any closing thoughts, Ethan, on maybe what's got you the most excited, for the roadmap coming up for Particle Network, and how can users interact, with Particle? Obviously, leading up to mainnet, leading up to the TGE coming up here soon. What are some closing thoughts on that level?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, thanks again for hosting and kind of the great questions here so far. And I think that in terms of our roadmap, we're getting pretty close to mainnet TGE. This is all happening over the next few months, going into the second half of this year. Q3 is our target for mainnet and a few other things. So yeah, pretty exciting kind of set of things happening over the next few months. We're of course going to be at ECC as well. So if anybody is going to be out there, we're going to be sponsoring Chain Abstraction Day with Nir and Agoric. We're also sponsoring Modular Summit with Celestia and a few other guys like that. And going to be at a few you'll probably see us around. We have a lot of things planned for ECC. So that's going to be pretty exciting. And then shortly after ECC is when we have a lot of things releasing around everything that I just mentioned. The SDKs, mainnet, this kind of stuff. So pretty exciting kind of stuff happening over the next few months. And also, I think what I'm personally quite excited for is that chain abstraction as a narrative and as an idea is getting a lot of traction. And I think it's going to continue gaining traction over the next few months. There's a lot of really incredible teams building in this space. And we've been very lucky to be able to work alongside a lot of them towards like really bringing chain abstraction to reality and getting very close to like a full implementation. So if anybody's interested in learning more about chain abstraction outside of the context of Particle, so like I mentioned, Particle is specifically focused on user accounts and bringing chain abstraction to the user level through the means of universal accounts. But there's a lot of other projects in the space that are building at different points in the stack that are bringing different types of value to chain abstraction, that are achieving it, and that are ultimately really required to create a full chain abstraction experience. So if you guys are interested, I recommend looking into things like Everclear, Near, Socket, Zion, and a few other guys like of this nature. There's a lot of really amazing teams that are all focused on this ultimate goal of removing kind of the multi-chain processes from the user experience. So definitely go check that out. And if you're interested in learning more about what chain abstraction is and how the chain abstraction stack of technologies is composed, we have a lot of content at blog.particle.network. We talk a lot about chain abstraction and sort of like what this means for the industry. So a lot of good content there. And beyond that, keeping a lookout for mainnet coming from us here over the next few months. It's going to be pretty dope. I'm quite excited for it.
Yeah, no, thanks for that. And honestly, before we close, I just want to say that, echoing, I think, what you just said, but I haven't, we had Everclear on a couple weeks ago. We just obviously have you guys on this week, but I've not heard a group of builders kind of building in the same sector, so collaborative as I have in kind of like the chain abstraction sector. So, pat on the back to you guys. I think everybody's, again, everybody says this, I think, whenever they interview, they're like, oh, we're focused on growing the pie. We're not focused on competing. When I hear like, a lot of these perps people, talk about that and then you look at it and you're like, no, man, like it's so PvP out there. But I for the chain abstraction projects, I truly think that that you guys are headed in the right direction with that. And it's going to be awesome for DeFi and for the industry as a whole. So again, thanks, Ethan. We really appreciate your time. For the users and the listeners, I guess, listen to the podcast. You can find Ethan. You can find Particle Network at Particle Network without the E. I believe you can see it you can find it in the show notes. But definitely, stay tuned to what they're building. Keep an eye on Revelo Intel. We're going to have a lot of great content coming out on Particle Network. And again, just thanks for listening, and thanks again, Ethan, for your time. We really appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks for having me. It was a great session, and looking forward to doing some more stuff with you guys as well.